In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear sight on a Kel-Tec P-11. And this is the sight from the CPX 1 or 2. And from what I've heard, it'll fit perfectly in the dovetail cut on the Kel-Tec P-11. So also kind of what I've heard is the Sky, I think either the owner or something like that, used to work for Kel-Tec. So that's why the guns are so similar. I don't know. But I do know that this rear sight should fit on here. So if you saw any of my other Kel-Tec P-11 videos, you can see that I lost my two white dots here, actually on the initial break-in. And it hasn't really bothered me. I kind of like the rear blackout sights. But does bother me is the plastic. So on another Kel-Tec P-11 that I've worked on, the rear sight did come loose and you could just push it all around by hand. So the metal rear sight with the set screw is definitely going to be a big improvement over the Kel-Tec P-11 rear sight. So we're going to get this thing aligned in here, get the sight pusher where we want it, and with this specific tool, we're always going to bring the pusher block this way towards the bolt head and not the nut, towards the solid jaw, not the adjustable screw right here. Just follow the guide for your tool, and it'll help you do it correctly. I'm going to slowly turn this. You can see that sight already moving. Plastic sight really didn't have a good grip on there. I'm just turning this socket here. So take a look here at this little sight. You can see when they make it, they just make it oversized, and since it's plastic, when it gets pushed into place, it just forms to the slide. Let's clean up this dovetail here. A lot of replacement sights are going to be a little bit bigger than necessary, and they do that on purpose so you get a really tight, solid fit. Okay, we've got the old sight taken out now. We want to get the new Sky CPX2 sight installed, and we're going to have to do some fitting because it's not going to go in place just the way it is. So the total dimensions here at the bottom. Let me give you a visual right here. This dimension is too big, needs to be brought in a little bit, and the way that we're going to do that is put it on a flat sanding stone, and we're just going to press down and sand it this way. And what that's going to do is it's going to make this side and this side closer together because we're bringing this bottom plane up higher. So that should make sense. But anyway, going to move this thing a little bit at a time, sand it down a little bit at a time until we get it to where we want it to be. I have a coarser stone here, and then I have a finer stone. Also, what you can do is you can use a jeweler's file or a sight file, what is it called? Or you can use a dovetail file. And what's cool about a dovetail file is it's a triangle-shaped file. You can get it in different angles. The typical angle, like for Novak sights, would be a 60-degree angle. So you have a triangle sight file size, a triangle-shaped file, and only one side actually has a cutting edge and the other two are flat. So you would use that to barely chamfer the inlets here just a little bit, widen it out so you could get the sight started. Ideally, you want the sight to go in about a quarter of the way before you start using the sight pusher. One thing you can do is you can use sandpaper if you need to remove a little bit more material quickly, but make sure you use it on a perfectly flat surface because you want to sand down the base perfectly even. I'm going to do some 320 grit sandpaper here to speed up the process a little bit. Alright, so I've got the rear sight down to the size that I want it. Did a little bit of test fit off camera. It took me a while to get it sanded down, probably about 15 minutes. You can see I lightly did this bottom edge here and there just to give it a better profile, but most of the sanding work was done here on the bottom. But we'll go ahead and measure this now. Kel-Tec's quality control is not as precise as a lot of places, so this is going to vary, but the size I got the rear sight down to was 0.0369, so I really didn't take off a whole lot. And I got it to start to fit down in here. So I just barely put it in a little bit because I wanted to show you guys the process. So you definitely don't need a sight pusher for this kind of job. You can definitely do this with a vise and some aluminum blocks or aluminum pads and some brass punches. You don't have to have a sight pusher. So I'm just going to get this thing aligned in here nicely to where I want it. Set it down. Make sure it looks good. It. And make sure you don't have any oil on the slide or the sight. And you can even use a little bit of 262 red Loctite if you want to. Alright, so now that I've got it to where it looks pretty close, can start to fine tune. This is going to be different for every pistol. If you have adjustable sights, you don't have to be as specific. But for a slide that uses fixed sights, you definitely want to get as close to center as possible. And it's ideal if you don't go back and forth. You want to just go one direction until it's perfect, pretty much. You don't want to accidentally over travel and then have to go back. So I'm going to take a few measurements here to make sure it's good, and that'll be all there is to it. So once you've got the sight in place, there's a couple different ways to make sure that you've got it perfectly centered. On a gun like a 1911 or a Glock, you'll be able to center the sight a little bit better using the method I'm going to show you because their quality control is better, and the machining is just higher quality. So the way that I'm going to test it here is I'm going to use my calipers. I'm going to use the depth gauge here at the bottom. I'm going to go put the bottom here on this raised serration and then press down on the depth gauge until it contacts the rear sight. So that's going to give me a reading of 0.034. Then we'll roll it over, do the same thing on the other side. Use the same raised edge and use my depth gauge to go down. And let's see what I get here. I got a reading of 0.02, let's see, 0.024. So it looks like we're a little bit closer, and I accidentally over-traveled just a hair. Let me take another measurement of this side to make sure that's right. Yep, so I'm about 10 thousandths off. I need to bring the sight back this way, which is exactly what I told you not to do. So to be spot on perfect, I'll bring it back just a hair and then I'll tighten up the set screw with a little bit of Loctite. Now, we're assuming that the finish and the milling on the slide is exactly the same for both sides. So even though this is off just a little bit, it may be perfectly straight on. Like I said, if you have a higher quality firearm, this is definitely going to give you a pretty good reading. You can definitely use the SCCY CPX2 sight. It's pretty much the same profile and the exact same height. So you want to go ahead and check and see what rear sight you're using. The Kel-Tec P-11, I know sometimes they have issues with the sight height. Like there's a sight kit that you can get with different height sights. So it's a good idea to go ahead and see which one you have. Let me get a height measurement here. I should have probably done this before I put it in, just to help you other guys out that may have the different sights on. Looks like my factory sight, that's the height right there, 0.240. So if your factory sight is shorter or taller, you may not be able to use this one, but for the generic factory rear sight, this will definitely work. What's nice about this is it also has a set screw on top. Put a little bit of Loctite on there, and once you get this thing set, you should be good to go. But that's the job pretty much. There could be a little bit of fitting for different pistols, but that's all there is to it. Putting a SCCY CPX 1 or 2 metal rear sight on the Kel-Tec P-11.